Thank you all for coming to our second meetup. And you know, this will grow. I appreciate Sarah and Linda. I needed to bring some ringers in, so I roped them in to get here for me, and I appreciate you guys in supporting us. Today's conversation is we're trying to shift between sort of the tactics of servicing law clients and the tactics of attracting law clients. And so another accounting person wrote me, or I was talking to her, and we're at QuickBooks Connect, and she asked, you know, like, we started talking, I said, well, you know, what are the questions you ask to a lawyer if you're engaging them? And she's like, I don't know. So I said, well, I'll just write a blog post about it. I don't know that these questions are right or wrong. So I figured we would just kind of talk through them. So Gary's here to speak. You can see you in the camera. There you are.
There we go.
Gary's
I'm on the camera.
And I haven't seen Gary in like 5 days. So it's nice to see you, Gary. Gary's here to think about and represent the lawyer. So he's the law side of what that might be. So I just sort of wanted to seed the conversation, see if I can actually get this to go to the next thing, and talk about the questions. Now, these questions, I don't know if they're good questions, bad questions. They're just questions I came up with fairly spontaneously. But I figured we'd start and talk about those, which is just go down the list. Now, the idea is there's no right answer or no wrong answer here, right? This is when you're talking to an attorney or any new client, there's some facts you got to get out. But there's some specific to a law client that I've seen in selling LeanLaw, which is kind of similar because it's an accounting discussion that routinely come out. So I'm just going to go through these really quick, and then we'll kind of dig into them a little deeper. And if there's a question that's not there that the group thinks we should talk about, just throw it out. So no formalities here. We'll talk for a little while, and we'll do our best with this. So, you know, I started with this question: please describe the steps and tools you use to track time, produce and draft invoices, and deliver invoices to clients. And the reason I started there is, to me, it was revealing about the process. You know, what are they doing today? And really what I was trying to get out when I wrote that was, what are the pain points? You know, like, where are they struggling in this process? Because, you know, I would think that they're, and I have another question, which is, why are you meeting? But like, why, you know, where are the pain points? So, Sarah, when you're engaging a new client, where do you start?
It's essentially exactly that. What brought you to me? What's going on? What's your pain point? How can I help? And generally, it gets very quickly guided to who they are, the type of billing they do, and it ultimately lands in trust. Don't know where my trust is. Don't understand how to make sure it's compliant.
It's interesting that you said trust, because I initially inferred that as like trust between you and the attorney in terms of the relationship. It wasn't, but functionally it's trust accounting.
It's immediate to that. Actually, I just got an inquiry of yesterday for somebody new, and it's definitely all about IOLTA, trust account, compliance. So
why do you think attorneys struggle with that so much?
I just don't think that they're set up to understand how to track it in a way that is the way that we track it, like the way that we help them track it, I guess you could say, to be fair. I think that they struggle with, they know what they need to do, they just struggle with making sure and maintaining it to the transparency it needs to be. And they're so terrified of it.
Yeah, and Gary, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, I know that you haven't necessarily bought practice management software on a day-to-day basis, but.
Yeah, this is interesting because I'm a partner in a 40-lawyer firm.
Okay.
So it's a little different animal there. I'm insulated from all of that. All I do is arrange for the trust and the trust payment if I get one. And I frankly don't use trust payments a lot in my practice. But so if I were having this conversation on behalf of my firm, I would probably be, I'm going to be most interested in reporting, but there's going to be our in-house accounting person sitting with me who's going to be very interested in things like how you handle trust and, the invoice review. When you get into a larger firm, you tend to have more compartmentalization.
Right.
So that, I would not see most of the accounting part. I put in time, I review draft invoices, and then I just kind of throw them back over the wall to the accounting people. So I'm not as directly engaged in things like trust. I'm going to, I care how my accounting team handles it, but I don't have, that's not my pain. My pain, I want to see a really smooth, easy time input.
Yeah. Well, I think there's 2 points that are really important. One is know who you're talking to and what their pain is.
Mm-hmm.
So when Gary said, okay, if you're talking to that principal attorney, and so it could be even like, I've seen this, even really small firms have the attorney is thinking, is it accurate, right? They want it and compliant, and what reporting can I get, right? Well, I want to know what the balance is essentially. But then you might have an office manager that is thinking tactically, well, how does this all work on a day-to-day basis? And I think it's important when you're asking those questions, you might ask an attorney and they may not know the answer.
They often don't. They often don't. And that's for that sake, for exactly what you're saying is you're a little insulated from it. You're dependent on other people to input the information. But there's a little level of communication and processes and policies and procedures that need to happen to be more consistent with how the data is coming in, where is it going, that it matches up. And sometimes without any fault to anybody doing the work, you just don't have somebody overseeing it with that same level of expertise that we all do in our professions to be able to say, hey, time out. You actually got a penny over here missing. Go back. Let's get your penny. It's always a dang penny. Anyway, so there's a level of we have trust in our attorneys for doing their rules and their your jobs, and then it's same with us. We have our ways of doing things to make sure that you're in compliance as well. But we can look at the numbers in many different ways. We're not doing the day-to-day. We're not emotionally attached to what's happening. We're not attached to the phone calls coming in and the interruptions. We get the back end side and we get to see it as a whole picture. So
I think there's another point to this first question is efficiency. Mm-hmm. So we talked about pain in the context of my trust balances might be off, or things like that. But there's also this idea of efficiency, and really trying to get how manual the process is. I was on the phone just before this call, before this meeting, with a firm that is set up to receive credit card payments directly into trust, although they're not necessarily trust payments, just because of the limitations of the merchant account or the constraints of the merchant, the payment processor. They're not a law pay or head note that will support multiple accounts. And I was like, you got to fix that today, because you have all this artifacts running through your trust account, and it's wrong, let alone inefficient. So I think, here's the message that I learned at QuickBooks Connect and over the last 3 years of this kind of working in this community. Whether it's lawyers or anyone else, they're now expecting the accounting community to create workflows, processes, tools, to be not just a bookkeeper in the sense of data collection and management, but to say, what's the most efficient way to wire all this stuff up? That's where you're almost like an outsourced IT entity related to the accounting side. At least that's my interpret. Linda, do you see that happening? I know you have your go-to tools, but are you seeing that in real world reality?
I'm finding, if you had asked me a long time ago that I was going to be that person that has to tell you what apps to use and be that atmosphere person, I wouldn't have believed it, but I need to know all the different softwares that integrate together. I actually just made a workflow paper. I shared it with Sarah with the workflow that I'm doing with a client that you guys referred to me. And it's what's great about it is it makes my fee affordable, but it's automating the bill payment part of it. It's automating, obviously, with LeanLaw, it's automating the accounts receivable. And I'm actually going to do some of that process for them. But you guys got the draft piece, which is great, so they can get a draft and then approve it. So it's and then, using HubDoc and they're going to pull the documents in. I'm going to have them attached, but I actually code that in to get it. It's a process, and it just goes. I mean, once you've set it up, it goes. So it's really wonderful to have those flows working where so much of it's automated. And, not even 10 years ago, I was typing all that stuff in. So it's amazing. Now, one thing, Brandy's still trying to get in, and if you could just somehow add her in, she's trying, but she can't do it because she's on. You have to let her in.
Oh, sorry. There's two people I wasn't letting in. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that. Okay, next time I will automatically add everyone.
Oh, there you go. I didn't know that was a feature.
Yeah, there's a function in setting up these. There's a function in setting these up that
Allow people to come in.
auto entry, and that's a new kind of feature for me. So again, I apologize. I'm slow in figuring this out. Let's go to question 2, which is, when you're working with law clients, you want to ask about their practice management tools. It's very similar to, someone else is waiting. Sorry. All right, I think I have everyone. Now I know to look at that little.
I thought it was on earlier.
So the second question is more specific. So one was more like a broad question, but my second question was, do you use a practice management tool? And again, to the group, anyone have any comments about that? I mean, I don't want to just be the, spewing my thoughts, but where does that, I guess I'll ask the question and anyone answer. Brandy, Brandy, are you with us now?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Sorry that I wasn't admitting you. Please don't take offense.
That's okay. I don't know how to make my video work, so.
My question is, Brandy, when you're on board, when you're, engaging in those first conversations with a legal client, when you dig around into what tools they're using relative to practice management or other invoicing, is that like the first question? Is that like the fifth question?
It's probably the second question after what accounting software are they using, QuickBooks Online or some other thing.
And what are you looking for, and what does it tell you? And what I mean by that is, it's a bit of a loaded question, but if they say Clio, what does that mean to you? If they say Panther, if they say time slips, if they say tabs, what does that mean to you depending on the app that they give?
Well, one, if it's an app that I already know how to use, then that, tells me, okay, I know how to use that. If it's something that I don't currently know how to use, then that's something that I need to tell the client that I've never used that before, but I can probably learn it, but I still need to look at it and then also make sure that it integrates with QuickBooks Online. And then the other thing is that there's some practice management softwares that say that they are an accounting software as well. And so they want to keep track of all of their bookkeeping within that practice management tool. And that's just, I won't take a client that wants to use that sort of system.
Say that again. You won't take clients. Why won't you take those clients?
Like people who want to use, what's it called? I think like tabs 3, don't they say that they can do all of your bookkeeping all within tabs 3 and not using QuickBooks Online?
I got it. Yeah.
Then I won't take those people as clients.
Yeah, Cosmolex is the online tool that is out there to not essentially be the anti-QuickBooks tool. They actually advertise in, saying, hey, we don't.
Alternatives to QuickBooks.
Yeah,
right.
And there's some merit to it. There's some logic there. I think that
Didn't tabs 3 just buy them?
Last
they
year,
did.
Tabs 3 bought them as their cloud-based tool, so it kind of stays consistent. I think that there's even some more nuance to that, which is like if your client says their practice Panther, they don't sync with QuickBooks, or at least it's a one-way sync and it's really clumsy, right? So that means to me more work. If they're Clio, there's limited sync. If they're LeanLaw, it's full sync. And I think that, your first question was, hey, are they in QuickBooks? Then the second question is practice management starts to tell you what their workflow is. It kind of begins to tell you where their accounts receivable, is there double entry, where their trust account's going to be. So like with Panther, you said yourself, Brandy, in a different discussion, that client you have with Panther, you can only touch their books once a month, right?
Right.
Because it's so, I don't know, what's the why there? Why do you only do it once a month?
Because the way that Practice Panther syncs with QuickBooks Online, it breaks like all of the time. And my client was basically like, they don't want to have to keep on fixing it. So we just set up a time once a month where we fix the sync and then sync everything.
And do you actually do this? Do you actually do the sync? I mean, you do an actual sync of data between the two?
Yeah, I push the button but they're the ones that have, because I only have basically a read-only access to their accounts. I can't change anything and I can't edit the system within Practice Panther. So they're the ones that have to contact Practice Panther and say, hey, fix the sync. And then I can push the button that says, hey, sync with QuickBooks.
Wow, that's crazy.
So how much extra time do you think that takes you, or what inefficiencies does that create for you? Can you quantify that at all compared to a tool like LeanLaw or even Clio?
It definitely adds time, especially because it's a once a month. Like I'm having to do all the bookkeeping only once a month as opposed to keeping up with it every week. I don't know exactly how much time it adds, but I would say probably in comparison to like LeanLaw, it's probably close to doubling the time that it takes to work with the trust accounts.
Wow.
Wow. So that's, for any of you who are thinking about getting clients, obviously that's going to affect what you can charge, what you need to charge in order to have a profitable relationship with somebody with those other tools.
Yeah, and I think it also, so that's what I was getting at is when I asked the question, which is, first it talks about, do they really need that tool, right? That practice management tool. Mm-hmm. Because if they're just using it for invoicing and it's in an inefficient, if it's an inefficient tool relative to QuickBooks, there might be an opportunity to swap them out, right? Like Clio's, LeanLaw bills at $35 a month per user. Clio's at like 50 or 60. And if they're using it for invoicing, you can make a case to say, hey, there's a better tool that does the same thing and it's easy to migrate over. But it also tells you a little bit about their process in asking that question about practice management. And I think it's important to know the inefficiencies of each tool so that you can build it into your relationship.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing about practice management? I've worked with practice management tools in my practice for 25 years, and they never seem to, in my experience, live up to the hype of being the all-in-one tool that a law firm uses. So most firms are using them just for billing or just for like document management and things. So, Time Matters was a tool we used in my firm for many years. It's now a dirty word.
Well, yeah, I didn't know you guys used Time Matters.
Oh yeah. And it was not, we didn't use Billing Matters, we used Time Matters. So it was document and email management tool. It was just awful.
Wow.
And then we had an accounting tool, an accounting and billing tool called ProVantage, which was equally awful. They didn't talk to each other at all. And, and then the firm finally just abandoned the whole idea of practice management. And now we use a document management tool and a billing tool that don't talk to each other.
Yeah, that's what I see often is document management, a component separate. But I'm curious from other people if they, like Janice and Heather and stuff, is what Prospective managements do you see, or what have you worked with, or I'm just curious what others have encountered.
I'm too new. I don't have any clients yet. That's what I'm doing this for, so I know what I need to do.
Okay, cool.
Michelle, what about you? You had to unmute.
Did I mute you?
No, I think she muted herself. You're muted? There you go.
That would be the problem. Thank you. So I was just looking, I just ran across the other day, and I hadn't heard of it, Smokeball.
Yeah, Smokeball is a practice management tool.
Right.
I don't know, candidly, I don't know why you would go there over another tool or why it's better or worse. I don't know it well enough. Smokeball, from a practice management standpoint, there tends to be 5 major online tools. In my case, Rocket Matter, Clio, Panther, and I'm missing one.
The Abacus or Amicus?
Yeah, that's that one.
Those tend to be bigger firms.
There's Bill for Time.
Bill for Time is another one.
Yep.
Is it a practice management tool?
Well,
It's a combination, I think.
Bill for Time so there's 2 tweeners.
Yeah.
Bill for Time and TimeSolve.
Yeah.
I
A lot
call
of
them tweeners because they kind of straddle both worlds with an emphasis on invoicing. And then there's, from a document management tool, there's one major player that tends to win, which is called out of Utah.
I know which one you're talking about. I've used it. I don't like it.
It's called
NetDocs?
yeah, NetDocs.
Yeah, I feel like I'm walking back in time, looking up.
Like a DOS day.
Yeah, Net Documents for a Microsoft-dominated law firm isn't awful because they have some pretty good integration in Office 365.
Yeah.
And the point is this. It's that in understanding why they're using the practice management tool and how they're using the practice management tool, you can glean 2 things. The first is it the right tool for the practice relative to invoicing and billing? I mean, they're not looking to you to say how you're going to manage the documents, but if they're just using it for time tracking, then there's an opportunity, and it doesn't talk to QuickBooks well, then there's an opportunity to make a change and make the right mix. And I'm not trying to sell LeanLaw here in this moment, but it's really what's best for your practice. Like what makes sense and works well with what you do. That's what's important, because when someone engages, there's always a discussion about change, right? That's what happens when someone.
Always. A lot of times too, if they're in an app, or maybe they just started out and they're excited and they got into an app that they're sold on it by the person selling it, that it does everything. You don't even need QuickBooks, and you hear that a lot of times, and you're like, well, yeah, you might still, QuickBooks is way better than whatever they've got into an app that's maybe just for really billing, but they've added a few pieces to make it a general ledger or whatever, and it doesn't work as well.
So my next question is, how do they bill? And this will tell you all sorts of things about their practice. It'll reveal things like, cash flow challenges. So just so we all know what one legal term that I brought up, hourly billing is, I have a rate of an hour and I bill incrementally. Attorneys typically bill in 6-minute increments. Some are maybe not so nice and bill a minimum of 15 minutes to start. I've seen it where someone actually asked me for the feature and I was like, we'll never do it. Like morally, we would never do it. They wanted every point 1 to be 15 minutes.
Oh my God.
Because they didn't want to bill point 1, point 2. And then from there it's, then you could do point, 3, point 4 and so on. But that's neither here nor there. That's just an attorney who doesn't want to bill less than 15 minutes. But the idea is they bill in 6-minute increments or tenths of an hour, or they bill quarterly hour typically. Contingency just means that they're working on spec to a certain degree. And what that means is that they're doing, typically it's personal injury or other legal cases where the attorney says, I will take and do all your legal work at no upfront cost, but I'm going to take a hefty percentage of what the settlement is. Typically 30%, right? And that's a third.
Yeah.
A third. Mm-hmm. Now, we have seen some hybrids, and this is important because you need, as the accounting person, to help them bill this stuff, right? So I had an attorney come to me and said, I'm doing a contingency matter, and I want, but I'm charging the client $20,000. I want them to pay it in $4,000 or $5,000 payments, and at the end, I'll take my $20K out when I do my settlement. So it's obviously they're expecting a hefty settlement. So that's a hybrid. So some attorneys bill fixed fee as a matter. So you have estate planners that will do wills or other estate planning in a very commodity kind of basis. A will is X dollars, and they just do lots of wills. So they might want to know, well, how profitable is a will, or how profitable is that work? And so different types of billing reveal nuances that help you say how you can add value. A contingency person is all about, cash flow and potentially capturing expenses. A lot of times in all these cases, the attorneys miss expenses and they sort of wash it out saying, I'm billing a lot, so I don't need to recoup those expenses. But the truth is, I think the truth is that they just don't have a good system to capture the expenses. Thus, they don't get it on the bill.
How do you make the attorney be willing to want to look at those expenses?
Can never make the attorney do something they don't want to do. Sarah, you speak. You got a big smile on your face.
Well, it's an interesting one. They do keep track of it, so that there is that. It's just being really good about the soft costs, which are the photocopies and all these other things that they don't keep track of because they just pay it as part of their, overhead.
Yep.
So that coming up with an agreed amount of what that would be is also kind of tricky sometimes. But they do know the cost. They, when they file for a case, they know that goes to that case. They do track all of that. It's really just really important for them to make sure that when they are going forward to billing it, that they're making sure they're capturing all of it as accurately as they can on that bill, and making sure that those expenses are moved over to the profit and loss to help support what they just billed. So they have an offset. Because when you're incurring it, you're setting it off to the side on the balance sheet for a while until it comes to that moment to bill it. And that can get really tricky for them. And that's another part that gets, you couple that with trust accounting, let's say, it kind of gets there, it just blows up a little bit. So.
And I think that, LeanLaw just fixed one major headache with expenses in that in the first quarter, in the fourth quarter of last year, we evolved our expense input such that you can enter bills, expenses, or checks directly, tag them to a specific general ledger. LeanLaw will monitor that general ledger and pull it over to LeanLaw so they can be recouped back in. So whether you're looking at a bank feed or you're putting in manual bills, those can be tagged by client, by matter, depending on how QuickBooks is set up, or even just put to an account and tagged in LeanLaw later so that they're getting from QuickBooks to the billing software. I think that's the second biggest problem why they don't get expenses on their invoices, is that they're sort of in QuickBooks and they've got Clio over here, and it's too manual to bring it over, so they wash it out. That's what I've seen. Okay, next question. How are retainers used in the firm? So we talked a lot about already, I don't want to dig too deep into this about trust accounting, but to me, this is probably the most critical question, because the value add here for you is compliance, right? Helping them be compliant. And typically, one of the biggest pain points, as Sarah said earlier, is that trust accounting is where they mess up. So my question is really, how do you guys how do you approach it? Brandy, I'm going to go to you to start. But so, how do you get your hands around someone's trust account? And before they've engaged you, just to even sense the scope of what the work is to fix it.
Yeah, so some people, I'll ask them, straight up, hey, how do you have a good handle on your trust accounts? But, of course, without signing an NDA first, they really don't want to tell you that, no, they don't have any idea, because they don't want to get in trouble. with the bar association. But when you I like to look at their books before I engage them. So that's sort of the second process after our first initial meeting. And I'll look at their QuickBooks and at their practice management tool. And from there, you can right away see if the balances match. And some people keep track of the per client in both QuickBooks and in the practice management tool. And some of them only use the practice management tool for keeping track of the individual client's trust account balances. So you really need to look at both of them to make sure that it is correct.
Sarah, did you have any thoughts beyond that?
No, I think Randy covered it well. It is it's important for us as the accounting professional to know to call out retainers, because sometimes they can get muddled in deposits incorrectly. People don't label them correctly. So we just have to make sure we call them out or help them in that guidance. But it's just like Randy said, you kind of quickly look and you know. You can gain it.
And I think this is I think this is the area beyond more than anything else that wins a client. You're being able to articulate an understanding of how to manage a trust account and help that attorney on a month-over-month basis set up the workflow so that they can actually succeed and be compliant. And Brandy, to a certain degree, I know that you actually do filings and things like that. I don't know if you charge more for that, but the idea of really understanding and owning and being able to speak to trust account management builds that confidence in that attorney's mind that you're a good partner for them.
So I had a question about this. Do any of you work in creating trust accounting reports that are filed with the bar?
I do.
Yeah,
I help some of my clients fill out their three-way reconciliation reports that they need to send in.
Right. So is that particular to certain states, or how does that work?
Yeah, not all states require a three-way reconciliation report sent in, and some of them require it monthly and some of them annually. So it just kind of depends on the
monthly. Oh my God.
State.
Interesting.
I could think about how hard an annual reconciliation report would look like. My goodness. If you haven't done it.
Is there any state that's harder than others, or are they all pretty much the same?
I mean, as far as let's say Texas, which is where I'm from, they don't require a three-way reconciliation report to get sent in. So obviously that's the easiest, right, is to not send one in. But then
Texas.
but
Go
then
ahead.
Free country.
It's all fine.
Yeah. And then in some states require that they do it, but they don't have to send in a form filled out.
Got it.
Got it. And do you charge more for that feature, by the way?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Because we've been going 40 minutes and probably 30 minutes time. Two more questions. And I think this is the most overlooked question. But what reports do you review? And you know, I think that this is really insightful as to what data points are important to the attorney as they're thinking about their firm. Any of the group, does anyone ask that question or queries around that question?
In respect to their financial
health
that you're talking about?
Report is a vague word. I'm just asking about, the financials of the firm, the productivity of the timekeepers, what a good client and bad client is, monthly reports, WIP against trust, work in progress against trust. Just so Janice knows, you have a trust funds and you have work in progress, and there's a ratio between the two. And if the ratio gets out of whack, meaning you've used up more trust, that's a red flag to the attorney, because they want to know, oh, wait a second, I've expired my trust money. I need to either ask for more or manage the project. So my question is, when you think about those reporting, does that come up as a conversation point in engaging the attorney? Beyond the basics, P&L, balance sheet, income statement. Yes, no?
I feel, to be fair, I feel that that comes much later in the engagement. The initial engagement is to really identify certain things, and then also it's not always the type of person that we deal with. Sometimes that's not initially what they're asking for. Sure, they want to understand it, but really what I feel like what we do a lot of times is the guidance of, is your chart of accounts intuitive enough? Do you understand where things are going? Do you understand where these need to balance? Just pinpointing it. Do you know that your IOLTA and your trust balances need to tie out every month to the penny on this sheet? I think it's so then when we get to the reports, and I can speak to this in a recent nature of reports that I did, and I'm unwinding, I'm going back even further now, is just making sure, like, your expenses, do you know where they live? Are they on the right sheet? Are they on the balance sheet? Are they on the income? So when we go to review that, I like to what I do is I look at it as a total with them, and I also like to look at it as a monthly, just for spot check. Because you want to pull out their P&L on a monthly and say, hey, look, and then you want to show the same example on the balance sheet. They know their cash flow. You have to go through cash flow with them, to be fair. They know it. It's just helping them understand where it is. And then once you get later in the engagement and further down the line, then you start to build those meaningful reports, because now you've cleaned up the information enough to where you can retain what they need and understand what they need. And you start kind of compiling it differently for them.
Yeah, so that's astute. So what you're saying is, hey, you got to walk before you can run. So if you don't have the parameters and the relationship and the vernacular up front, it's difficult to go to phase 2. The one comment I would say, though, which I think is important if you're dealing with any firm that has multiple attorneys, is to ask the question, how do they derive compensation?
Yeah.
Because you can't wait for that. Compensation can be complicated, depending on, you know, how it's derived. Sometimes if it's a really small firm, like 1 or 2 attorneys, I mean, I say 2 or 3 attorneys, it can be fairly simplistic. There's an overhead number. There's, you know, revenue you generated as a responsible attorney, and, you know, basically you get what you've made minus overhead. Others can be more sophisticated, especially as you have originating attorney. That means someone who brought the client in. So Gary could be the working attorney. I could be the originating, which means I get a cut off of Gary's collection amount. So I think that's I think that's something that's really important. I don't think it's that, as I can tell you, people looking at LeanLaw, it's not asked enough. It comes up after the fact. Like, because we have to get the data out to make sure that we can capture it, so that we can put a report together that says, here's your compensation. And I think that's the one report that should be discussed up front, relatively up front. And it might be very simple. If it's a solo attorney, it's not a very complex thing, right?
Yeah.
It's the minute you get partners and or potentially staff. So you might have I've seen paralegal environments and associate attorneys where they're salaried, but based on collected amounts of work they bill, they get bonuses. So I think that's just an important consideration, is to ask the question about compensation.
It's true. It's one that just came up for me, and it's definitely one that was discussed by the attorneys that were held to how much money they were going to make based on their billable hours and what they were going to collect.
And that can be something that another firm that we're talking about, that can be you can change that from being something that happens only after the fact to being something real time and transparent. So like, as an example, LeanLaw is introducing in the next probably 2 weeks an upgraded version of our reporting system. So we used to just report by responsible attorney. So we didn't differentiate from working attorneys. So if Gary and I were working and I was a responsible attorney, I would collect 100% of that money, which is not always accurate because of the way compensation is done. So we just changed it such that we track now, we're going to be tracking attorney revenue by who's billing.
Yeah.
So you'll get a report then at any time in real time that shows what was billable, meaning the amount that's able to be billed, what was billed, what actually got on an invoice, and then the most important number, what was collected over a period. And then that will also factor in originating. So that's all in one report and can be real time. So it's fully transparent to the partners as to where they stand.
I would think this would be a really good the asking about reporting, even if it's not the first thing on their minds, would be really important with any firm over about 5 attorneys. Just
Critical.
just so you get it on the table, understand what's coming, because it can be very complex. And my firm has massive spreadsheets and a really complicated formula that includes, profit pool and all sorts of things that are critical to the operation of the firm. And if you're just thinking about billing and invoicing, you can totally miss the capabilities that are going to be needed for reporting.
Yeah, and it can change. They bring in a new partner, and the partnership agreement changes, and that can change the whole reporting. Last question, and then we'll end on this, which is, I always think, and I don't think you asked the question directly, but why are they meeting? Why are they there? The reason, I always think there's only 3 reasons someone's meeting you to engage you. It's a new firm, something isn't working, or they're outsourcing, meaning they're doing something internally that now they want to do externally. I don't know another reason why someone would take a meeting on hiring a new accounting person. So I think that's understanding that question, whether you ask it directly or indirectly, is really important, because it gleans information. If it's a new firm, it's all about talking about how we can create structure and process. If something isn't working, it's about identifying the pain points and fixing them. If it's about outsourcing, it's again about workflow, but it's about efficiency. And those become speaking points as to how you might approach and sell that client. Any comments from the group on that as to how you've seen that play out differently?
I think for me, we get this, most of the people that we end up having for clients, they come with us, usually they come with messy books. I hate to say it, but especially this time of the year, they look at it and they say, I really should get this ready because it's time to file the taxes. And then you look at it and you have to start like right at the beginning, chart of accounts, like what do you have here? And really it becomes a relationship that builds off of that, fixing the mess.
Interesting.
I think it's the first question you ask, and you kind of just ask in a way of like, how did we get here? What are your needs? What are your pain points? And it really helps identify the relationship at that point. And then it moves into all these other critical pieces. They'll start to show themselves and what becomes important. So you might not maybe address certain things on the front end, but you'll evolve into it because it's necessary. It's the necessary evil to support the firm and to support the owners, and establishing on the onset who you're going to deal with. Dealing with the owner and an appointed person is fine. That's fine. But making sure it's clear that you're dealing with the owner of the firm or the principals of the firm.
I ask the question every time I do a LeanLaw demo with a new client, that's my job here, one of my jobs.
Yeah.
I always start by saying, in a nice way, so why are we here? What motivated you to take this meeting? That's the first question. What are you doing today? And I always ask the third question is, what's the most important thing for you to get out of today's meeting? And I want to qualify those 3 things because it helps me steward the conversation downstream from there. By them telling me why they came there, they're essentially articulating the pain. Someone's leaving, we have this program. If they tell me how they're doing it, then I understand workflows so that when I'm showing them LeanLaw, I can sort of show them how they would look at LeanLaw from their vantage point, which is really important to put the context in their lens. And then the third is trying to make sure that they're seen and heard and that we get exactly out of it what they want. I think so many times in sales calls, the sales guy, and I as a younger person probably did this too often, which is just start talking and not listening and not asking probing questions. Because people will, once they get going, they'll tell you everything. They really want to tell the story. They just need a little bit of trust to get that conversation started. Okay. We're 52 minutes in, so we're at the end. I thank you all for coming, Sarah, Brandy, everyone, for Linda and Janice for coming again, Michelle for coming again. We're going to keep doing this, and I know this is a small group, but you know, these are the types of conversations we want to have and this type of collaboration we want to have, and it's going to get a little bit bigger and grow. And next month we'll do something probably more tactical. I think it's probably going to be around expenses. Because we want to show off either the reporting in LeanLaw or the expenses, and talk a little bit about how we track expenses for law firms. I think that's going to be the topic, and we can show some stuff in LeanLaw and then come out and talk about it in more practical sense. So,
Of course, if you have suggestions, we'd love to
yeah,
hear
yeah, Gary's right, and me talking.
We appreciate your time too. Actually, I've taken a lot of notes and some good stuff here, Jonathan. I'm gonna use.
Awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you all, and have a really nice day, and we'll talk to all of you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.